we know who the enemy of peace is. Unfortunately, he has a name. He's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu.
Some of you, including many of my friends in Ontario in Canada, didn't like the fact that I have often targeted Canada for its complicity in Israel's genocidal campaign in Gaza, in the occupied West Bank, and now in Lebanon. This, despite the fact that Canada has been helping, right from the day one, helping Israel launch its genocidal campaign against unarmed, defenseless Palestinian civilians. This video today, the video that I'm making, will show you that why you have been utterly wrong and I have been absolutely right in my criticism of Canada for its support, or for sponsoring actually, the genocidal campaign of Benjamin Netanyahu. Let's look at the developments of the last 24 hours. As many as 12 countries, including the US, Canada, Australia, the UK, the EU, that includes Germany as well, many Arab countries who are more than keen to establish normal relationship with Israel, they ask Israel to commit to a 21-day ceasefire. You know what Netanyahu did? The rogue regime of bloodthirsty terrorist Benjamin Netanyahu has now rejected that joint call for an immediate 21-day ceasefire made by the UK, the US, Australia, Canada, the European Union, France, Germany, Italy, Japan, Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, and Qatar. Just imagine the clout this war criminal Netanyahu enjoys over these so-called powerful countries, including those sponsoring his genocidal campaign. Despite the fact that we saw something extraordinary this week in the Canadian Parliament, I'm shocked by the conduct of the political class in Canada. When I was 19, I had the privilege of going to Canada and staying there for good to 4 to 5 months and spending my time with a Canadian host family as part of Indo-Canada Youth Exchange Program. I had fond memories. I always thought that Canada was a peace-loving country. So for politicians like Justin Trudeau and his fellow war criminals to denigrate Canada to this level is utterly shocking. The proceedings in the Canadian Parliament this week was briefly halted. You know why? Because there is a lady called Elizabeth May. She is the leader of the Green Party of Canada. She called Netanyahu the enemy of peace. That was her fault. That was her sin. The leader of a key political party in supposedly a first world country, Canada, got up to blame Netanyahu for being a stumbling block in establishing peace in the Middle East. This led to the proceedings of the Canadian Parliament being halted. And then her freedom of speech was curtailed right inside the temple of democracy. The fact that she called Netanyahu the enemy of peace, this was simply unacceptable to her fellow MPs. They booed, prevented Elizabeth May from continuing with her speech. And then the speaker intervened until a member of the administrative staff whispered something in his ear. And then he ordered the Green Party leader to complete her speech in just 10 seconds. She was asked to conclude her speech within 10 seconds. And when she did not complete her speech within the next 10 seconds, the speaker muted her mic, thereby preventing her from expressing her opinion freely.
The honourable member from Saanich Gulf Islands.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And on the same point, it's clear that world leaders have been calling out for the last year since the horrific attacks of October 7th for restraint and to control the conflict so it doesn't spread as it just is spreading into Lebanon. And we know who the enemy of peace is. Unfortunately, he has a name. He's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, and he has put his political career and his...
Colleagues, I'll ask you to please only... I'll ask you only to take the floor when you're recognized by the chair. The honourable member from Saanich Gulf Islands, one moment, please. I'm going to ask the honourable member from Saanich Gulf Islands to conclude her question. She has 10 seconds on the clock.
Mr. Speaker, is that we are allies of Israel, but Israel's Prime Minister is unpopular. He's put his personal ego and political career ahead of rescuing Israeli hostages, and he seems to care nothing about innocent civilians, whether in Gaza.
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, the violence in the Middle East needs to stop. We need to see hostages released. We need to see Hamas lay down its arms.
And these countries lecture the world on freedom of speech and expression. In their own countries, they can't ensure freedom of speech for one of the important MPs inside the parliament, which, as I just said, is usually deemed as the temple of democracy. I don't know if this was the Canadian Parliament's way of respecting war criminal Netanyahu, or it was because of the fear of the terrorists from Tel Aviv. I mean, only yesterday and day before yesterday, in the last 48 hours, we saw Keir Starmer and his minion David Lammy pleading to Israel to commit to an immediate ceasefire.
Let the hostages go. And we must face up to the humanitarian catastrophe in Gaza that continues to deepen by the day. Israel must grant humanitarian access to civilians in line with its obligations under international humanitarian law. There can be no more excuses. Israel must open more crossings, allow vital life-saving aid to flow, and provide a safe environment for the UN and other humanitarian organizations to operate. The region is on the brink. We need an immediate ceasefire between Israel and Lebanese Hezbollah.
The rockets must stop now. The airstrikes must stop now. Talks must start now, with an immediate ceasefire on both sides now. It is time to pull back from the brink. Mr. President, a full-blown war is not in the interests of the Israeli or the Lebanese people. And that is why, within hours of last week's strikes, I called for an immediate ceasefire between Lebanese Hezbollah and Israel. Since then, we've worked closely with the United States and France to formalize a wider demand for the ceasefire and a political plan to implement it. And at the UN in New York, the Prime Minister and I have been urging our G7 and other partners to do the same. Our priority must be a political solution, in line with Resolution 1701. It is our duty to do all we can to exert maximum diplomatic pressure.
Instead, Netanyahu has said that his group of trained terrorists would continue to cause massacres in Gaza, in the occupied West Bank, and now Lebanon, using weapons provided by the US, the UK, the EU, Canada, and Australia, among others. This is the reality of the Western world. You saw the shambolic conduct of America and UK and the UK and the EU. Many of you did not agree with my criticism for Canada. Now the fact is before you. You decide for yourself. I mean, in the temple of democracy, a leader of an important party, the Green Party, is being banned from speaking. Literally banned from speaking. Why? Because the speaker was frightened. He was scared. That's the reality of these so-called developed countries. Canada in this case, the country of maple leaves. Thank you very much for your support of this platform on buymecoffee.com and Patreon. If you do think that this platform is worth supporting, then you should also consider becoming part of it. In the meantime, if you haven't subscribed to my channel, please do so, because that's one of the many ways you can support independent journalism. God bless you all.